The Leaks were a most remarkable family. Raymond and Sheila were beautiful both on the outside and within. They were physicians, as specialized as they could possibly be within their respective microfields. Kind of doctors so important they were flying out to different parts of the country every other week, because there was only a handful capable of doing what they did. Their home was a modern marvel. They designed it themselves. They had it built near the top of one of the winding roads in Beverly Hills. The kind of thing only independently wealthy people from already rich families could afford. In June of 1989, they gave birth to their first daughter, Mia. She was born completely blind, not even partial vision in either eye. It was the kind of obstacle that would probably hold someone back unless they were brought up in a home where it was impossible to fail. She was remarkably intelligent, just like her parents. She was always at the top of her class, excelling and understanding any type of concept the teachers could find in the curriculum. Where she already shined was on the piano, though unable to see the keys where her fingers scaled them like spiders. She was an absolute master of the craft. In September of 1991, the Leaks had their second child, Harrison. He was on a direct path to stardom pretty well from the days where he was first learning to walk and talk. Like the rest of the family, he excelled in his academics, arguably the biggest standout of the four. He was a great athlete too, playing sports year-round and not facing the same disadvantages in the regards of his older sister. However, much like Mia, his artistic creativity was really where he excelled. He wasn't just a talented and smart kid who made nice things for the teachers and parents to look at in the classroom. The sculptures and the paintings that kid produced, well, I've still never seen anything quite like it. None of us have. He had a way of working with his hands, which always seemed to be calloused, yet still so precise. He could make foreign-looking figures and structures, sometimes tens of them in the same piece. They were odd scenes from faraway planets and dimensions, the kind of thing you couldn't picture in your head, even if you sat there with your eyes closed for years. The skill was there in massive proportion. There's no denying that. It was hard to define what was so remarkable about his style aside from the fact that it was dark. No cheap tricks or paper-thin characters, but a style that was profound and intellectual in a gloomy way. Certainly not the type of thing that you'd expect to see from a child. It continued to be fostered with such brilliance while he grew into adolescence. Don't make the mistake of thinking that Harrison showed any of the early signs. He was as happy and compassionate of a kid that you could ask for, almost like he was unaware of how special he was and how much attention he garnered. You would never have known what an elite he was if you were to stop and chat with him while passing on the street. We used to put him on a pedestal at school. He was the kind of kid that you wanted to be friends with. I always used to ask him where he got his inspiration, and his answer was always the same. The monsters. Perhaps the one irrational thought that existed in the young man's head was his devout belief that there were really monsters that visited him in his sleep. He'd become so familiar with the idea that he'd even given them names and described the way either one looked. He was convinced they would come to him bearing gifts out of the darkness in the wee hours of the night. They brandished the pieces of the scales of their palms, same ones that he would recreate himself. He would wake up hurting. The vision so clearly burned into his head that he thought it near impossible for him to not bring them into the world. As far as Harrison was concerned, the works of art weren't his. He was only the medium to transpose. Everything belonged to them. For whatever odd inspiration it may have been, Harrison was able to ride its momentum until his teenage years, where he was making clay figures and oil paintings of distant planets, by the likes no one could believe. He started to catch the eye of art aficionados all over the country. People started to inquire and invest. His parents were putting them online and selling them for egregious amounts. And the already very wealthy Leak family kept getting richer. Mia moved out to New York after high school to work at a hedge fund with her aunt. Without his older sister around, Harrison was only put underneath microscope more intently by his loving but very demanding parents. It wasn't until the night of his premiere exhibition where I first witnessed any cracks in the pavement. Of course, I had insider information, the one who got to see the monsters in a way that no one outside ever could. A great number of friends and family had shown up that night. Harrison stood in front of his exhibit in pinstripe tux, smiling, nodding towards all the newcomers. But familiar and not, he carried himself like a man twice his age, like the whole thing wasn't overwhelming in the slightest. All 13 of his pieces sold that night, some of them at enormous prices after bidding wars had broken out. Everyone was laughing over champagne in the reception hall afterward. Harrison had waited until I'd isolated myself from the group and sent off a couple of photos. His face was so starstruck. I can never forget it. All the years and success that he had managed to keep his head down and ego in check, but the smile on his face right then made me think the existence of his greatness had finally settled into his mind. He clutched a rolled-up piece of paper, thought maybe it was perhaps a contract or a printed receipt of all the money that he'd earned that night. He slowly unrolled it right in front of my face, keeping his fingers loose like it was the most valuable document in the world. "Look," he said. "Incredible, isn't it?" The creation was light years behind to both the skill and creativity of Harrison's hand. It was a picture drawn with pencil, crayons, and cracked graphite. The shapes and colors were scribbled all over and bending over each other's boundaries. My eyes flipped back to Harrison. He leaned closer towards me, still looking elated. "What do you think?" I don't know. Is this a new piece? Is it something that you're trying to use for inspiration? Is it supposed to be ironic? I really don't know, Harrison. Harrison laughed like my bewilderment was absurd. "I'm not using it for inspiration. It is my inspiration." He pushed the paper closer to my face like I was in desperate need of a second look. I tried to focus on exactly what it was. There were 2 colored blotches on the far right, one green, one red. They were jagged like broken Christmas ornaments and had little stick legs and arms and heads drawn on, and they appeared to be in a bedroom. There was an uneven rectangular window with a T going through the middle. There was a lopsided dresser and even a rounded chest at the foot of the bed on the far left. In the bed lay a stick boy body without any covers on. His mouth was drawn in a messy version of this sad rainbow shape, and he had short stubby hairs drawn on the top of his head, which his stick arms appeared to be pulling at. It looked like a common children's picture, and not a particularly good one. I stepped back away from him. I couldn't see what he saw in it that made it so special. I don't know, Harrison. He flipped the picture back to him. His eyes widened and darted over the page. "It's the monsters," he said. It's the most elated I'd ever seen him. How could it be for such an uninteresting and unskilled work of art? I couldn't think of any explanation for. Sadly, it would become an expression that I would grow accustomed to seeing over the following months. He would share his experience with that picture and all the ones that followed with me in an intimate level I wish I could have distanced myself from. That was where I started to see the decline of his career and the whole Leak family getting sucked along with him. He showed up on my doorstep uninvited a week later. He brandished another one of the pictures and was once again intent on showing it to me and explaining just how sure he was that it was the monsters. It was just as messy, just as unimpressive. The green and red blotches on the far right were a little closer to the middle, but aside from the obvious variation and the inconsistencies in such a crude work of art, it was nothing more than a recreation of the same picture the week before. The same thing happened the next week and the next ones, consecutively after that. With each passing picture exposition, he became more and more convinced that the drawings were gifts from the monsters themselves. They were attempts for relieving their existence to him, and for the ultimate plan to cross into our world and live amongst us. I tried to talk him out of it and put things into perspective. I tried to tell him they were from a disgruntled fan or some prank by one of the kids in the school who was jealous of his success, and for a long time I really did believe that until one day he literally pulled up his shirt and showed me long red scratches all over his belly. The picture he showed me that day had the monsters drawn slightly sharper, and now halfway across the room. I wondered how far into madness he'd ventured. Had he created these wounds himself as a means of attention, or something even more sinister? Even worse, he'd been drawing those pictures himself and flaunting them in front of me like they were some kind of masterwork. Harrison's works were rapidly morphing amongst his dissent. He started to attempt recreation of that same scene from the pictures. He tried to sculpt the broken shapes of the monsters, scribbling on their colors and trying to make them look the same. New scratches and bruises were showing up at his arms and his neck area all the time. The rest of the leaks weren't doing well either, almost as if their success hinged on his. Harrison told me the family hedge fund in New York was apparently on the verge of bankruptcy, so Mia had to stay over at the Christmas break working double time just to keep the ship afloat. There were rumors that Raymond's medical license was in jeopardy of being revoked after malpractice on a pediatric surgery upstate. The house was a pressure cooker, and I was there when the whole thing blew open. Harrison had invited me over one evening, and I initially thought that it would finally be the time that I confronted him and told him I didn't want to see him anymore. I was headed off to college in the fall and was out of gas trying to stay alongside him as he sabotaged his own life. He brought me up to his room where he literally recreated a life-sized version of the pictures. The monsters were made from felt and papier-mâché. He had newly purchased pieces of furniture set up on his room to resemble as closely as he could the background. "I could feel them coming," he said. "They haven't missed a week yet. They're in the house." I was saved the terrible task of thinking of a response by violent footsteps coming up the stairs. His parents burst into the room, already screaming and reprimanding their son for bringing me there. "We told you to take this down," his mother screamed. "You're disgracing the Leak family," his father followed. They kept yelling at him until he was in tears. They tore down his craft monsters and ripped them apart. All of this happened with me still standing there, distraught, and in disbelief that they would unload on their son with me still there. They went on about how they were 2 paychecks away from not being able to pay the mortgage. They went on about how much support and financial aid they'd given him to cultivate his career and how he was pissing it away with this stupid obsession over monsters that didn't actually exist. They threatened to kick him out. They threatened to disown him. They kept berating him and wouldn't stop until it was forced to the point of excusing myself and slipping out the front door. I used the excuse of illness to skip dinner with my family. I spent most of the night lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling. Mostly I felt sad. It was still hard to believe that such a perfect set of lives were in ruin. I noticed something out of place on my nightstand, a letter. Not something I had really been accustomed to receiving during my teenage years. My mother must have left it there for me. There was a dark part of me that knew what I was going to see inside the envelope. I wanted to close my eyes and pretend I hadn't seen it when I pulled the picture out. It was the same scene, done in the same style. Undeniably the work of the same hand. The only difference was the end recipient. I could only guess that it was a matter of Harrison driving himself so mad that he'd gone weary of bringing the pictures over to my house and wanted to save the step. I looked closer. There were subtle details drawn distinctly different in that one that wasn't in all the others. The monsters were closer to the bed. They loomed right over the prickled stick boy lying there. This time they held things in their graphite arms. Both of them carried pointed objects, and one had a little bottle in their hand. An unnerving feeling came over that I couldn't suppress. This is the same nonsense that had been agitating me for weeks, but still there was something odd about the picture in my hand that felt so much worse than all the others. I called 911 and I made up a phony excuse of a woman screaming at the Leaks house to get them to send officers over. The operator tried to keep me on the line, but I was too antsy. I was too unsettled to sit there and do nothing, only a block or two away. I hung up, I hopped on my bike, and I pedaled back to the Leak house as quickly as I could. The front door was open, probably left that way by me after I had let myself out. The house was dark and silent. I called out tentatively, scared of any potential response that I might get. I tiptoed up to Harrison's room. The house felt very empty in comparison to how it had a couple of hours before. His door squeaked high and long when I pushed it open. I caught the monsters red-handed. Both of them. They were moving across the room towards Harrison's bed. One had a big bottle and both of them brandishing kitchen knives. Raymond and Sheila Leek stopped dead in their tracks. They turned to me and they dropped what they were carrying right as the policeman walked through the front door downstairs. The bottle rolled to my feet, and even in the dark I could clearly read chloroform written on the label. That night would be the start of an investigation that would eventually put Sheila and Raymond Leek behind bars for 25 years of chronic child abuse, both Harrison and Mia. They found evidence they'd been sedating their children, doing unimaginable things to them in the night, with a devout belief that it was somehow the cause of their children's creative success. The picture had been sent to us from a private psychiatric ward in New York. Mia had been permanently checked in there after all the emotional and physical trauma she had endured growing up. The aunt and family hedge fund out east was all a fabrication. The pictures that Mia had been sending us, well, they were simply her way of trying to tell us. Hey there kids, and happy holidays. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you guys thank you for watching tonight's video. If you enjoy watching videos here on YouTube, then you should check out the MrCreepyPasta Storytime podcast, which is available on Spotify and on iTunes and on Google Play and everywhere like that. If you enjoy listening to MrCreepyPasta's Storytime podcast, you'll enjoy watching it on YouTube because it's the same show. You guys are both hearing the exact same thing at the exact same time. Also, thank you guys for supporting me on Patreon or on Popbase. You guys who are the top supporters on Patreon especially, thank you so much. Like Joey Gilbert, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Wayne Milstead, Chambinski, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Tine-Janzen, Stephen Van Huss, Tristan Pelton, G Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Asia, The Red Oak Shield Virus, Sandy Barney, Nico Kyle, Caleb Dougal, Daniel Paulson, Dante Rao, Last Blade Song, The Ginger Bros, Don Muemeister, Eliminator 86, Nubsky, Finley E. Hopkins, Steampunk Sinner, Rafael Rodriguez, Optimistic Avocado, and Dr. Strawberry. Everyone there, as well as in the description down below. Thank you guys so much. If you'd like to also follow me on Popbase, where you can get a couple of different updates here and there and play games along with me, then you can do so on your phone. It's on Android and on Apple. And if you guys are looking for something like a hot beverage, such as, say, a tea, for the cold winter months, then my wife is still selling teas over at etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocle tea, including a MrCreepyPasta tea that has me on it dabbing. Don't actually, if you do order that tea, request that sticker because we made it, but she didn't want me to put it on the tea because she said it wasn't professional. I think it's whatever. Check back throughout the entirety of the holiday season for more horror stories every single day. Forever. Sweet dreams, kids.